The first thing I remember was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Slow. Precise. Unforgiving. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether it was morning or evening. The hospital room was dim, the blinds only half open, letting strips of pale autumn sunlight stretch across the floor. My chest felt heavy as if someone had placed a bag of concrete over it. Every breath reminded me of the surgery I'd barely survived. A nurse noticed my eyes opening and smiled. "Welcome back, Mr. Harrison. You've been asleep for almost 2 days." 2 days. The number settled in my mind like a stone sinking into deep water. I nodded weakly, still too exhausted to speak. Tubes ran from my arms and every movement sent a dull ache through my ribs. I remembered collapsing while trimming the maple tree in my front yard. Then sirens. Then nothing. The nurse adjusted my blanket before leaving the room. "You've had visitors," she said. "Your son barely left your side." That surprised me. Ethan and I hadn't exactly been close these past few years. We spoke on birthdays, Thanksgiving, and the occasional Sunday afternoon. Since my wife, Margaret, passed away 3 years earlier, the distance between us had only grown wider. Not because we fought. We simply stopped understanding each other. About an hour later, Ethan walked in carrying a paper cup of coffee and wearing the same confident smile he'd perfected in business meetings. "Dad," he said, letting out a relieved sigh. "You scared us." He leaned over and hugged me carefully. "I thought I was going to lose you." For the first time in years, he sounded like the little boy who used to wait by the front window every evening for me to come home from work. I smiled. "I'm tougher than I look." He laughed politely. The conversation stayed light. Doctors. Recovery. Medication. Physical therapy. He kept reassuring me that everything outside the hospital was under control. "You don't need to worry about anything," he repeated several times. "Just focus on getting better." Something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned the house. "How's the old place?" I asked. "It's fine." "The maple tree?" "I'll take care of it." "My dog?" "Staying with friends." Every answer came too quickly. Before leaving, he squeezed my shoulder. "I've handled everything, Dad." Those words lingered in the room long after he disappeared down the hallway. The following afternoon, a hospital social worker knocked softly before stepping inside with a clipboard. She introduced herself kindly and pulled up a chair. "I just need to go over your discharge plan." I nodded. "We'll probably release you in 4 or 5 days, assuming your recovery continues." "Sounds good." She smiled while checking several boxes. "So, where will you be staying after discharge?" I frowned. "My house." Her pen stopped moving. She looked up at me, confused. "I'm sorry." She glanced back at the paperwork. "I was informed your residence was sold last week." The words didn't register. "What?" She blinked. "I assumed your family had already discussed it with you." I stared at her. "Sold? My house?" "No," I whispered. "There must be some mistake." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Harrison. According to these documents, the property has already changed ownership." The room suddenly felt smaller. The steady beep of the monitor became louder. My pulse climbed. I reached for the bedside table with trembling hands. "My son." I could barely force the words out. "My son would never sell my house." The social worker lowered the clipboard. "I truly hope this is a misunderstanding." But something inside me already knew it wasn't. And for the first time since surviving open-heart surgery, I realized the hardest battle waiting for me wasn't with my heart. It was with my own family. The rest of that afternoon passed in silence. I kept replaying the social worker's words over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. "Your residence was sold last week." It couldn't be true. I'd owned that house for 42 years. Every room held a memory of Margaret. The pencil marks on the kitchen wall still measured Ethan's height as a child. The porch swing where my wife used to drink coffee every Saturday morning. The maple tree I had planted the week Ethan was born. A house wasn't just a building. It was my entire life. By evening, Ethan returned carrying fresh clothes and a small bouquet of white lilies. "They're Mom's favorite," I said. He smiled. I remembered. For a brief second, I almost forgot what had happened. Then I looked at him. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed. There wasn't a trace of guilt on his face. I decided to ask him directly. "The hospital social worker told me something strange today." He set the flowers down without looking at me. What was that? She said, my house has been sold. For the first time since he'd walked into the room, he froze. Only for a heartbeat. Then he sighed heavily as if he'd been expecting this conversation. Dad. I was going to tell you after the surgery. I stared at him. So it's true? He rubbed his forehead. You needed emergency surgery. Insurance wasn't covering everything. Someone had to make a decision. The house was the only option. His explanation came quickly. Almost too quickly. I looked him straight in the eye. How much were the medical bills? He hesitated. I don't remember exactly. You sold a 4-bedroom house and you don't remember the bills? It's complicated. That answer bothered me more than anything else. Ethan had spent 20 years working in corporate finance. He remembered every number, every receipt, every tax deadline. Now suddenly he couldn't remember the largest financial decision of our family's life? He changed the subject almost immediately. You shouldn't be stressing yourself. The doctor said your blood pressure has to stay down. We'll talk later. Then he stood up. I have to meet someone. Before I could ask another question, he was already walking toward the door. Dad. He paused. I did what I thought was best. The door clicked shut behind him. I wasn't convinced. The next morning, I asked my nurse if she could bring me my phone. Its battery had long since died. Once it was charged, dozens of missed calls and messages appeared, most from neighbors wishing me a speedy recovery. One name caught my attention. Linda Brooks, my next-door neighbor. She and her husband had lived beside Margaret and me for over 30 years. I called immediately. She answered before the first ring finished. Oh my goodness, Richard. I've been trying to reach you for days. I just woke up yesterday. There was a pause. Richard. Her voice became cautious. Did Ethan finally tell you? A knot formed in my stomach. What exactly was I supposed to know? Another silence. Longer this time. I don't think I should be the one telling you. Linda. I need the truth. She let out a slow breath. 3 moving trucks arrived 4 days ago. They emptied your house. Yesterday. My husband saw a young couple carrying furniture inside. They're living there now. I closed my eyes. So it wasn't just sold. No. They've already moved in. My chest tightened. Not from the surgery. From something far worse. Linda continued carefully. I thought you knew. Ethan told everyone you had decided to move into assisted living after your recovery. I knew that wasn't like you. I felt the room spin. I had never once discussed assisted living. Not with Ethan. Not with anyone. Someone had created that story. And everyone believed it. After hanging up, I sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes. None of it made sense. If the house had truly been sold to pay my medical expenses, why invent a story about assisted living? Why move strangers into my home before I'd even opened my eyes after surgery? Why rush everything? Questions multiplied faster than answers. That afternoon, another visitor arrived. Not Ethan. My attorney's legal assistant. She carried a sealed envelope. Mr. Harrison? Mr. Collins asked me to deliver this personally. My attorney? She nodded. He has been trying to contact your son for 3 days. I frowned. Ethan hasn't returned his calls? No. He said it was urgent. She placed the envelope gently on my bedside table. As she turned to leave, she stopped. Oh. Mr. Collins also asked me to tell you something. What is it? She hesitated. He said, don't sign anything until we've spoken. The door closed quietly behind her. I stared at the unopened envelope. Whatever was happening, it was much bigger than a house sale. And for the first time, I began to wonder if my son hadn't simply made a desperate decision, but had been planning something long before I ever entered that operating room. For several minutes, I simply stared at the sealed envelope resting on my bedside table. My name was written across the front in my attorney's familiar handwriting. Richard Harrison. Personal and confidential. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Not because of my surgery. Because, for the first time, I was afraid of what I might learn about my own family. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a short handwritten note. Richard, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't reach Ethan. Please don't sign any documents, agree to any financial decisions, or discuss your estate until we've spoken in person. There's something you need to know immediately. Michael Collins. Michael Collins had been my attorney for nearly 25 years. He wasn't the type to exaggerate. If he'd written those words, something was seriously wrong. At the bottom of the envelope sat another document. The title caught my attention immediately. Harrison Family Trust. I frowned. Of course I remembered it. 6 months earlier, I'd sat across from Michael in his downtown office after something Ethan had said during Thanksgiving dinner refused to leave my mind. It had seemed harmless at the time, almost casual. "Dad," he'd said while carving the turkey, "that old house is worth a fortune now." I had laughed. "It's still just home to me." He smiled politely. "But one day you'll have to think about what's practical." Practical. Such a simple word. Yet something about the way he'd looked around the dining room had unsettled me. Not sentimental. Not nostalgic. Calculating. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. After all, Ethan was my only child. I trusted him. Or at least I wanted to. Still. The conversation lingered in my thoughts for weeks. Eventually, I scheduled a meeting with Michael. Not because I suspected Ethan of anything criminal. Because I realized I hadn't updated my estate plan since Margaret passed away. Michael had listened patiently while I explained my concerns. "You don't think Ethan would hurt you," he'd said. I shook my head. "No. But I think grief changes people. And money changes them even faster." He nodded. "I hear that more often than you'd imagine." That afternoon we made one important decision. Instead of leaving everything under a simple will, we transferred nearly all of my major assets into a revocable family trust. The retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, several certificates of deposit, even the small cabin Margaret and I owned near Lake Tahoe. Michael became co-trustee until my passing. No single family member could legally control those assets without following the trust's instructions. The only thing that remained outside the trust was the house itself. At the time, it seemed like the simplest arrangement. I never imagined that choice would become so important. My thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the hospital door. Michael Collins himself walked inside carrying a leather briefcase. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Richard." He shook my hand gently. "I'm glad you're awake. You've been trying to reach Ethan?" He nodded once. "For 3 days. No answer." "He ignored your calls?" "He ignored my emails too. That wasn't like Ethan. Not even close." Michael sat beside the bed and opened his briefcase. "I need to ask you one question. Did you authorize anyone to sell your home?" "No." "Did you sign a power of attorney?" "No." He sighed quietly. "I was hoping you'd say that." My heartbeat quickened. "What happened?" He folded his hands carefully. "Ethan contacted a real estate attorney the day after your surgery. He claimed you had decided to liquidate the property before moving into long-term care." I stared at him. "I never said any of that." "I know. That's why I became concerned." He slid several copies of legal documents across my hospital tray. "Fortunately," he paused, "he made one enormous mistake." I looked down at the paperwork. "The buyers believed the house represented your entire estate. So did Ethan." Michael gave me a faint smile. "But because we created the Harrison Family Trust, he has no legal authority over the rest of your assets." The room suddenly felt strangely quiet. "So?" I asked slowly. "He sold the house, thinking he'd gained everything?" Michael nodded. "He believed the house was the key to your entire estate. But in reality," he tapped the trust documents with one finger, "it's only a small piece." For the first time since learning my home had been sold, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about my son. Had he really been waiting for an opportunity like this? Or had desperation pushed him somewhere he never intended to go? Before I could ask another question, Michael reached into his briefcase once more. "There is one more document." His expression turned serious. "I found it this morning." He placed a photocopy on the table. At the bottom, where my signature should have been, the handwriting looked almost identical to mine. Almost. I stared at it for several seconds before whispering, "I never signed this." Michael met my eyes. "I know." And that's when this stopped being a family disagreement. He closed the folder and became a criminal investigation. After Michael left the hospital, I didn't touch the stack of legal papers for the rest of the afternoon. The forged signature haunted me. I'd spent my entire career as a civil engineer. My name had appeared on contracts, blueprints, and legal documents for over 40 years. I knew every curve of my signature better than I knew the lines on my own hands. The one on those papers looked convincing. Convincing enough to fool a stranger. But not convincing enough to fool me. Someone had practiced writing my name. Someone who had seen my signature countless times. The thought made my stomach turn. The following morning, Michael returned with a private investigator named Sarah Jensen. She wasn't what I expected. No trench coat. No dramatic introduction. Just a woman in her early 50s carrying a thin laptop bag and a notebook filled with sticky tabs. "I've been reviewing everything connected to the property sale," she said after introducing herself. "There are several things that don't make sense." Michael nodded. "Show him." Sarah opened a folder. The house sold for nearly 30% below market value. I frowned. Why would anyone do that? To close the sale quickly. She slid another page toward me. The buyers made an all-cash offer. They closed in less than 6 days. That explained the moving trucks. The entire transaction had happened while I was unconscious. As if someone had been racing against time. Sarah continued. "We also reviewed the financial records." I leaned forward. "This is where things become unusual." She pulled out several printed bank statements. The money from the sale never went to the hospital. My heart sank. "It didn't?" She slowly shook her head. "No. It also didn't enter any account belonging to you." "Then where did it go?" Michael answered quietly. "An account controlled by Ethan." The room fell silent. I felt something break inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Disbelief. For days I had tried to give my son the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he had panicked. Maybe he'd made terrible decisions under pressure. Maybe he honestly believed he was saving my life. Now those possibilities were disappearing one by one. Sarah opened another folder. "We also requested public financial records." I looked at her. "Can you do that?" "Certain records, yes." She nodded. "Your son wasn't financially stable." That surprised me. Ethan always looked successful. Expensive suits. Luxury SUV. Country club membership. Business trips every month. The picture of success. Sarah continued. "Appearances can be misleading." She pointed toward several documents. His consulting company had been losing money for nearly 2 years. Several business loans were overdue. 2 investment properties had recently gone into foreclosure. Credit card balances exceeded 6 figures. One lawsuit from a former business partner was still pending. Every page revealed another crack beneath the polished surface Ethan had carefully built. I stared at the documents. I had no idea. "He made sure you didn't," Sarah replied. Memories began flooding back. Ethan insisting on paying for dinner. Ethan buying a new luxury vehicle. Ethan talking about expanding his business. Had all of it been financed with borrowed money? Had he been pretending everything was fine? Then I remembered something Margaret used to say. When people work too hard to look successful, they're usually trying to hide something. At the time I'd laughed. Now I wished she'd been wrong. That afternoon I received another unexpected visitor. Emily, my daughter-in-law. She stood hesitantly outside the hospital room holding a small paper bag. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying. "May I come in?" I nodded. She closed the door behind her. "I'm so sorry I haven't visited sooner." "It's all right." She sat quietly for several seconds before speaking. "I didn't know." The words were barely audible. "I swear to you. I didn't know what Ethan had done." I searched her face. There was no anger. Only shame. "What did he tell you?" I asked. Emily wiped away a tear. "He said you wanted to sell the house. He said the doctors believed you wouldn't be able to live alone anymore. He promised we'd help you find a beautiful retirement community." Every sentence matched the lie Linda had told me about. It wasn't a story Ethan had invented for one person. He had repeated it to everyone. Friends, neighbors, even his own wife. Emily reached into her purse and placed a folder on my bed. I found these in Ethan's home office yesterday. Inside were brochures for luxury condominiums overlooking the waterfront, a purchase agreement, furniture catalogs, architectural renderings. The estimated move-in date was 2 weeks after my surgery. Not after my recovery. After my surgery. As if my future had already been decided. Without me. Emily covered her face with both hands. I thought we were finally buying our dream home. I never asked where the money came from. I should have. I gently placed my hand over hers. This isn't your burden to carry. She began crying quietly. Then she whispered something that chilled me far more than the forged signature ever had. Richard. She looked into my eyes. I think Ethan expected you to die. The room became perfectly still. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I wanted to reject the thought immediately. To defend my son. To believe no child could think that way about his own father. But the rushed sale. The forged documents. The lies. The moving trucks. The new condominium. The unanswered calls. One by one, the pieces were beginning to fit together. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I realized this might never have been about saving me. It may have been about what my son believed he would inherit after I was gone. I barely slept that night. Emily's words echoed through my mind long after she had left the hospital. I think Ethan expected you to die. Every father wants to believe there is a line his child would never cross. I had spent the last 3 days convincing myself that Ethan had simply panicked, that he had made reckless decisions under impossible pressure. But panic didn't explain forged signatures. Panic didn't explain secret bank accounts. And panic certainly didn't explain shopping for a luxury condominium before I had even opened my eyes after surgery. Something far darker had been unfolding. The next morning, Michael Collins arrived with an unusual expression. Not angry. Not worried. Determined. We're ready. I looked up from the hospital breakfast I had barely touched. Ready for what? To stop Ethan before he causes more damage. He placed another folder on my bedside table. This morning, the county recorder temporarily froze the property transaction. I blinked. I thought the sale was already completed. It was. But because we've presented evidence of fraud, the title company and the buyers have been notified that ownership is now under legal dispute. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. The house might not be lost forever. An hour later, Sarah Jensen joined us carrying a laptop. I've spoken with the buyers. I expected them to be furious. Instead, Sarah surprised me. They're victims too. She opened several emails exchanged between Ethan and the real estate agent. He repeatedly told them you had personally decided to downsize after your surgery. He even claimed you'd already selected a retirement community. I shook my head slowly. He built an entire story. Sarah nodded. And everyone believed it. The buyers had acted in good faith. They'd believed they were purchasing a home from a willing seller. Now they faced the possibility of losing both the property and months of planning. They're cooperating fully, Sarah said. They've already handed over every document they received. Michael smiled faintly. That gives us exactly what we need. Just after noon, there was another knock at my hospital door. This time, Ethan walked in. He looked tired. His expensive suit was wrinkled. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. Dad. His voice sounded unusually cautious. I heard you've been talking to Michael. I have. His eyes immediately shifted toward the folders on my bed. I wish you'd called me first. I couldn't help noticing he never asked how I was feeling. He never asked whether my recovery was improving. His first concern was the attorney. He pulled a chair beside the bed. I know this looks bad. Looks bad. I repeated quietly. You sold my home. I had no choice. The bills were piling up. I held his gaze. Which bills? He hesitated. The hospital. How much? Silence. Ethan. How much? I don't remember. I leaned back against the pillow. Funny. You remembered exactly how much my house was worth. But you can't remember the medical bills that supposedly forced you to sell it? His face tightened. You don't understand how stressful this has been. No, I don't. So explain it to me. Before he could answer, the hospital room door opened again. Michael entered. Behind him stood Sarah. Neither of them looked surprised to see Ethan. In fact, it almost seemed as though they'd expected him. Michael closed the door. "Ethan, we need to talk." Ethan immediately stood. "This isn't the place." Michael calmly placed several documents on the bedside table. "I think it is." He slid one page toward Ethan. "The bank transfer." Another. "The forged signature." Another. "The county fraud notice." I watched the color slowly disappear from my son's face. "What? Where did you get these?" Sarah answered calmly. "From the people you lied to." The room became painfully quiet. For several long seconds Ethan said nothing. Then his shoulders slumped. "I was going to fix everything." Michael folded his arms. "How?" "I just needed time." "Time to do what?" "Pay everyone back." "With what money?" No answer. Sarah opened another document. "The proceeds from the house sale." She pointed toward several recent transactions. "A luxury condominium deposit. A new Range Rover lease. Private investment transfers. Designer furniture." Every sentence seemed heavier than the last. None of the money had gone toward my medical care. Not a single dollar. I closed my eyes. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was realizing how carefully he had planned a future that no longer included me. Ethan suddenly looked at me. Not at Michael. Not at Sarah. At me. His voice cracked for the first time. "I never wanted this to happen." I looked back at him quietly. Which part? The lies? The forgery? Or me surviving? The question hit him harder than I intended. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Only silence. It was answer enough. A security officer gently knocked before entering the room. Not to arrest Ethan. Not yet. Simply to inform him that detectives from the County Financial Crimes Unit wished to speak with him downstairs. Michael had already reported everything. The investigation had officially begun. Ethan stared at the floor, then slowly looked back at me. For a brief moment, I no longer saw the confident businessman. I saw the frightened little boy who used to run into my arms after falling off his bicycle. Only now, I couldn't protect him from the consequences of his own choices. As the officers escorted him toward the hallway, he stopped at the doorway without turning around. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad." The door closed softly behind him. The room fell silent once again. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, all I felt was grief. Because sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't losing your home. It's watching your own child become a stranger. The day after Ethan was questioned by detectives, the hospital felt strangely quiet. No lawyers. No investigators. No surprise visitors. Just the soft hum of machines and the occasional footsteps echoing through the hallway. For the first time since waking from surgery, I had nothing to do except think. That turned out to be the hardest part. I kept replaying memories that refused to leave me. Teaching Ethan how to ride a bicycle in our neighborhood. Helping him build a Pinewood Derby car when he was 10. Watching him walk across the stage at his college graduation while Margaret squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. We weren't a perfect family, but we had been a happy one. Somewhere along the way, that happiness had slowly been replaced by ambition. Then distance. Then silence. Now, here we were. A father recovering from open-heart surgery. A son under criminal investigation. Neither of us had imagined life ending up like this. That afternoon, Michael Collins arrived carrying another folder. He placed it on the bedside table but didn't open it. "The district attorney contacted me this morning." I nodded quietly. "They're moving forward?" "They believe there's enough evidence." I looked toward the window. Outside, leaves drifted gently across the hospital courtyard. "What happens now?" Michael spoke carefully. Ethan could face several charges. Forgery. Fraud. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Each charge landed like another weight on my chest. He paused before adding, "The prosecutors also asked whether you're willing to cooperate." I already knew what that meant. Without my testimony, the case would become much more difficult. Michael waited patiently. He had known me for decades. He understood I wasn't deciding between winning and losing. I was deciding between justice and my own son. After several minutes, I finally asked, "If I refuse?" "They may still proceed. But your cooperation would strengthen the case considerably." I nodded. And if I cooperate? He'll likely be held accountable. Neither answer brought me peace. Later that evening, Emily visited again. This time she brought my 2 grandchildren. 9-year-old Sophie rushed into the room first. "Grandpa." She hugged me carefully, avoiding the bandages on my chest. Behind her stood 6-year-old Noah, clutching a stuffed dinosaur almost as big as he was. "We made you something," Sophie said proudly. She handed me a folded piece of construction paper. Inside was a crayon drawing. It showed our old house, the maple tree, the porch swing, and all of us standing together. Me, Margaret, Ethan, Emily, the children. Above the drawing, Sophie had written in uneven letters, "Family is home." I felt my eyes fill with tears. Not because of the picture. Because to them, none of the legal battles mattered. They simply wanted their family back. After the children left to buy snacks with Emily, I remained staring at the drawing. Michael quietly spoke. "They're innocent." "I know. They shouldn't have to lose both their grandfather and their father." "I know." He hesitated. "You also shouldn't have to sacrifice justice." That was the impossible part. Every decision seemed to punish someone who hadn't deserved it. The following morning, Ethan requested permission to visit. I almost refused. Almost. When he entered, he looked nothing like the confident executive I'd known. He wore plain clothes. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. He remained standing near the door. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I said nothing. "I've spent the last 2 nights thinking about Mom." That caught my attention. He continued quietly. "She always said money should make life easier. Never make us forget who we are." His voice cracked. I forgot. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked directly at me. "I wasn't waiting for you to die. I was terrified you'd survive and discover what I'd done." That confession somehow hurt even more, because it meant he had known all along that what he was doing was wrong. "I don't need your money anymore," he whispered. "I'll sell everything. The condo, the car, everything. I'll spend the rest of my life paying it back if I have to." I studied his face. For the first time in years, I didn't see arrogance. I saw shame. Real shame. "I can't erase what happened," I finally said. "You sold the home your mother and I built together. You lied to your wife. You lied to our neighbors. You forged my name. You planned a future that didn't include me." He lowered his head. "I know. But listen carefully." He looked up. "I won't spend the rest of my life trying to destroy yours." His eyes widened. "That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. It means revenge isn't one of them." Tears rolled silently down his face. A week later, I gave my official statement. I told the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't ask the court for the maximum punishment, nor did I ask them to ignore what had happened. Justice, I believed, should never depend on anger, only on truth. When I left the interview room, Michael walked beside me toward the parking lot. "You made the hardest decision possible," he said. I looked at the folded drawing Sophie had made, still tucked safely inside my jacket. "No," I replied quietly. "The hardest decision is believing that one terrible choice doesn't have to define an entire life." For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't thinking about the house. I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about whether a broken family could ever become whole again. 3 months later, I stood beneath the maple tree that had shaded my front yard for more than 40 years. Its leaves had begun turning shades of amber and crimson, just as they did every October. The air carried the familiar scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. For a moment, if I ignored the moving truck parked across the street and the unfamiliar car in the driveway, I could almost pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. The court had ruled that the buyers had acted in good faith. Rather than forcing them out of the home they had purchased, a financial settlement was negotiated between the title company, Ethan, and several insurance policies. It wasn't the ending I once imagined, and surprisingly, I was at peace with it. A house had been lost, but another family no longer had to lose theirs because of someone else's deception. As for me, I had moved into a small one-story cottage overlooking a quiet lake about 20 minutes away. It wasn't nearly as large. It didn't have Margaret's garden. It didn't have the old porch swing. But every morning, sunlight reflected across the water just outside my kitchen window, and somehow that felt like a new beginning instead of an ending. The criminal case concluded 6 weeks later. Ethan accepted responsibility. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement that required restitution, community service, financial penalties, and years of supervised probation. Many people expected me to celebrate. Some even told me justice had finally been served. But sitting in that courtroom watching my only son lower his head before the judge, I didn't feel victorious. I simply felt old. Old enough to understand that life rarely gives us perfect endings. Justice had been done. Yet no judge could restore the years we'd lost. A month later, Ethan asked if he could visit. Not to discuss money. Not to argue. Just to talk. I almost said no. Then I remembered something Margaret used to tell me whenever we disagreed. Closing a door is easy. Leaving it unlocked takes courage. So I agreed. He arrived alone. No expensive suit. No luxury watch. No polished speeches. He wore faded jeans, an old flannel shirt, and carried nothing except a small cardboard box. When he stepped inside my cottage, he looked around quietly. "It's beautiful," he said. I smiled faintly. "It doesn't leak." He laughed for the first time in months. It wasn't much, but it was real. He placed the box on the kitchen table. "I found these while cleaning out storage." Inside were old family photographs. Margaret laughing while decorating the Christmas tree. 8-year-old Ethan proudly holding his first baseball trophy. A faded picture of the three of us standing beside the freshly planted maple tree in front of our first home. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at the photographs. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I spent so many years chasing a bigger house that I forgot I already grew up in one filled with everything that mattered." His voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Dad." This time. He wasn't apologizing because lawyers had advised him to. He wasn't apologizing because detectives were watching. He wasn't apologizing to avoid consequences. He was apologizing because he finally understood what he had destroyed. I looked at my son for a long time. Then I quietly reached across the table. Not to shake his hand. To hold it. Just as I had when he was a frightened little boy afraid of thunderstorms. "You don't rebuild trust with words," I said softly. "You rebuild it with time." He nodded. "I know. I'll wait as long as it takes." Life slowly found a new rhythm. Every Sunday afternoon, Emily brought Sophie and Noah to visit. We fished from the small dock behind my cottage. Sophie still insisted she could beat me at checkers. She never could. Noah continued naming every turtle that appeared near the shoreline. He called them all Frank. None of us ever figured out why. Sometimes Ethan came. Sometimes he didn't. When he did, we talked about ordinary things. The weather. Football. Gardening. Not because the past had disappeared, but because healing isn't built by reliving yesterday every hour of every day. It's built by choosing to live differently tomorrow. One chilly November evening, Sophie noticed an empty space beside the front porch. "Grandpa," she asked, "where's your swing?" I smiled. "I guess I never bought one." The following weekend, a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Ethan stepped out carrying long wooden boards. I thought. He hesitated. "Maybe we could build another one. Not for the old house. Not to replace the past. Just for this little cottage by the lake." The two of us spent the entire afternoon sanding wood, tightening bolts, and arguing over instructions exactly the way we used to. As the sun disappeared beyond the water, we hung the finished porch swing together. It wasn't perfect. One side squeaked every time it moved. We both laughed. Margaret would have laughed too. That night, I sat alone on the swing, listening to the gentle rhythm of the lake. I realized something I wish I had understood years earlier. My son hadn't stolen my life. He hadn't stolen my future. He hadn't even stolen my home. Because a home was never the walls we'd painted, or the roof we'd repaired, or the mortgage we'd finally paid off. Home was every laugh shared around the dinner table, every bedtime story, every Christmas morning, every second chance. Those things had never belonged to a building. They had always belonged to us. As I looked across the quiet water, I whispered the words I wished Margaret could hear. "We're finding our way back." A cool breeze carried the last autumn leaves across the lake. For the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like something was ending. It felt like something was finally beginning.